I bought an apple tree, planted it carefully, watered it every week, talked to it like it was a member of the family. 3 years later, that tree was the size of a small house. The branches took up half the garden, and when summer came, we harvested exactly 16 apples. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the person on the farm next door, with a tree half the size, was filling box after box every season. I walked over and asked what the secret was. He looked at me, pointed at his tree, and said one word: March. If that resonates with you, or if you have fruit trees in your garden and feel like they're not giving everything they could, subscribe now. Because what's coming in this video could completely change the way you see your orchard. Want what I'm about to explain today? You won't find summarized like this in any modern gardening book. It's the difference between a tree that gives you more fruit than you can eat year after year, and one that simply takes up space. And it all revolves around a window of time that most home gardeners miss without even knowing it. The month of March. March is not January. That matters more than you think. And if you're thinking, I already read something about winter pruning, wait. Because what I'm going to explain is different. It has to do with something the tree's biology does uniquely when the buds begin to wake up. Something you can only take advantage of during this month. If you don't understand this difference, you can prune your trees and still see no improvement in your harvest. But if you do understand it, you're going to triple your production with the same hands, the same tools, and the same trees you already have. Let's go through all 7. Tree number 1, the apple tree. The apple tree is the most important fruit tree in temperate climates and the most responsive to pruning of all the trees we'll cover today. If you have a single fruit tree in your garden, it's probably this one. And if you've spent years frustrated by low production, the cause is almost certainly that no one ever explained how to redistribute its energy. An unpruned apple tree, in a wild state, can reach 30 feet tall. It might produce 40 or 50 apples a year, scattered across branches you can't even see from the ground. But a well-pruned apple tree in a home garden, kept around 8 to 10 feet tall, can give you 250 apples a year, all reachable without a ladder. The difference is not in the fertilizer, not in the watering, not in the variety. It's in what you do with the pruning shears in March. So why March and not January or February? Here's the first piece of information that changes everything. In January and February, the tree is still in deep dormancy. When you prune during that window, you're doing structural pruning. You're shaping the skeleton. That's valuable, but it has a side effect. It stimulates vigorous growth of new wood. The tree interprets those cuts as an attack signal and responds by producing strong vegetative shoots. More wood, less fruit. March, on the other hand, is the moment when the buds begin to swell, but the tree hasn't fully leafed out yet. In this threshold, and the tree is emerging from dormancy, and pruning wounds heal with extraordinary speed because the sap is already moving. The tree's energy reserves are at their highest point before the expenditure of spring growth. When you prune now, in this precise moment, the tree doesn't interpret the cuts as a danger signal that triggers defensive growth. Instead, it redirects that accumulated energy directly toward flower and fruit production. How do you prune the apple tree in March? First, remove all dead or diseased wood. Dead wood is gray, dull, without buds. Cut it flush at the junction where it meets the rest of the structure. Second, remove branches that point inward toward the heart of the tree. These branches will never receive enough light to produce quality fruit, and they create a humid microclimate that encourages fungal disease. Third, identify the main leaders, the structural branches that emerge directly from the trunk and shorten them to an outward-facing bud. Always cut half an inch above the bud at a slight angle so water runs off. The ideal shape for a home apple tree is the pyramid or central leader. Short branches, controlled height, a canopy well lit throughout its entire extent. This shape isn't just aesthetic, it's functional. Short branches resist the weight of fruit and ice better, and an open canopy allows sun to reach every cluster, which improves the sugar content of the fruit. Not pruning your apple tree in March is letting the tree make its own decisions. And a tree's decisions, from an evolutionary standpoint, will always favor growth over reproduction. That's what they've done for millions of years to survive. Your job as a gardener is to redirect that instinct. Tree number 2, the pear tree. The pear and the apple are cousins in the same botanical family and are pruned with very similar criteria. But there's one key difference you need to know. The pear tree tends to be even more vigorous than the apple. If you don't control it, it will put even greater proportions of energy into making wood and less into making fruit. The clearest sign of a poorly pruned pear tree is long, nearly vertical branches with very little fruit. Those vertical branches that gardeners call water sprouts are pure growth. They produce no fruit. They only consume energy. In March, pear pruning follows the same scheme as the apple. Remove dead wood. Open the center of the tree for light. Shorten leaders to outward-facing buds. But with a mature pear tree, now once it's past its first 4 or 5 years of training, you need to be especially cautious about how much wood you remove. Why? Because the more you cut a pear in late winter, the more vigorously it will sprout in spring. If you overdo it, you'll get a tree full of vigorous new shoots that will take years to become fruiting wood. The correct strategy with a mature pear is a light March maintenance prune, followed by a more aggressive summer prune in August to curb that vigor and force the tree to convert energy into fruiting spurs. I'll explain that mechanism in detail later because it's what multiplies the harvest. If you're getting value from this, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this video matters and helps more gardeners discover what most books never explain clearly. Let's keep going. Tree number 3, the peach tree. The peach tree is the quintessential stone fruit of Mediterranean and temperate gardens, and it has pruning characteristics that completely separate it from pip fruits like the apple and pear. Here's something that if you don't know, it can cost you the entire harvest. The peach tree produces fruit exclusively on last year's wood, not on old wood, not on the current year's shoots, on 1- and 2-year-old wood. This radically changes how you prune it. When you look at your peach tree in March and see thick, old branches with dark, rough bark, those branches are not going to give you fruit. The fruit will come from the finer, younger shoots that grew last summer. In March, your job with the peach tree is a very precise balance. You remove enough old wood to stimulate the production of new young branches, but you always keep a generous amount of last year's wood, because that's where your harvest is. The classic technique is called renewal pruning. For every branch you remove, you leave a young replacement branch that will take its place and produce fruit this year. If you remove old wood without leaving young substitutes, the tree needs an entire year to recover and you get no harvest. March is ideal because the peach tree is especially susceptible to a disease called leaf curl, caused by the fungus Taphrina deformans, which infects primarily during cold, wet periods. By pruning in March, when temperatures are more stable and the risk of severe frost has passed, wounds heal much faster and exposure to the fungus is minimized. Pruning shape for the peach tree, open vase structure. in 3 or 4 main arms emerging from the trunk and opening outward like the fingers of a hand. The center of the tree must remain completely free of branches so air circulates well, which dramatically reduces the risk of fungal disease. Tree number 4, the plum tree. The plum tree has a reputation for being easy, robust, undemanding, and that's partly true. But that same toughness makes many gardeners abandon it to its own devices and then wonder why it produces little, or why the fruits are small and crowded. The plum, like the peach, is a stone fruit. It shares the same vulnerability to diseases that enter through pruning cuts, especially silver leaf disease, a fungus that can destroy entire branches in a few months if pruning wounds are left exposed in cold, wet conditions. March is the golden month for the plum. The risk of hard frosts has passed in most regions, temperatures are more stable, and healing is fast. And with the plum, this is not optional. If you prune in December or January and temperatures drop sharply afterward, an open wound on a plum tree can be the entry point for diseases that ruin the tree in a single season. What to do in March with the plum? Remove all suckers without exception. The plum is one of the most sucker-prone fruit trees. Those long, vigorous, completely straight shoots emerging from the base of the trunk or even from the roots produce no fruit ever. They only steal energy. Cut them flush. Leave no stump, because if you leave even half an inch, they regrow stronger. Then remove crossing branches, inward pointing branches, and any wood showing signs of disease. And when you finish each cut on the plum, apply wound sealant immediately. Don't leave any wound open. It's your tree's life insurance. Are you seeing the pattern? Every one of these trees responds to the same fundamental principle. You are consciously manipulating where the tree's energy goes. You're not just cutting branches. You're speaking the tree's biological language. Let's continue, because the 3 fruit trees coming next hold the biggest surprises. Tree number 5, the cherry tree. The cherry has 2 problems that make it especially challenging for home gardeners. First, it grows very fast and very tall. An unpruned cherry can easily reach 30 to 40 feet in a few years, putting all its fruit at a height only the birds can reach. Second, as a stone fruit, it shares the same vulnerability to fungal diseases as the plum and peach. And training pruning for the cherry must be done in March, right when the buds are swelling, but before shoots have opened. At this moment, the tree is starting its activity and wounds close rapidly, minimizing exposure time to fungi. With the cherry, the primary pruning goal is keeping the tree at a manageable height, 12 to 15 feet maximum. To achieve this, each year in March, you cut the main leaders to limit height, always leaving a fork or a lateral bud as a continuation point. If you simply chop the leader without leaving a relay branch, the tree produces 10 new shoots at the cut point, competing with each other, and the result is worse than before. The second thing you do with the cherry in March is thin lateral branches to improve light penetration into the interior of the canopy. Next, cherries are very susceptible to fungal diseases in humid, poorly ventilated environments. A dense, closed canopy is an invitation to brown rot and other fungi. Wound sealant on the cherry is not advisable. It's mandatory. All cuts, large and small, must be sealed immediately. Make it part of the ritual. Cut and seal. Cut and seal. Don't go take a coffee break in the middle of the job, leaving wounds open. Tree number 6, the pomegranate. This is the fruit tree that the fewest people prune, and the one that transforms the most when you start doing it. Left to its own devices, the pomegranate grows as a bush. It sends out multitudes of shoots from the ground, from the branches, and from the trunk, and turns into a tangle of competing branches. The result is an impressive shrub that produces few pomegranates, small and mediocre quality. But when pruned correctly, a home pomegranate can produce 30 to 40 large-sized pomegranates. The ideal time to prune is precisely when the tree begins emerging from dormancy and the buds start swelling, which in most temperate and Mediterranean zones happens from late February through all of March. What do you do with the pomegranate in March? First, and most important, remove all, absolutely all, the shoots and suckers growing from the base and from the ground. The pomegranate produces suckers with extraordinary abundance, and if you leave them, in 2 years, you have an unmanageable bush. Cut them flush. Second, if you're in the tree's early years, decide whether you want a single trunk or 2 or 3 main trunks. The multi-trunk form that mimics the pomegranate's natural growth is perfectly valid and very decorative. What matters is that you are the one deciding, not the tree. Within whatever structure you've chosen, the principle is always the same. Remove branches going inward, those crossing, and dead or very old wood. Keep young branches oriented outward, because the pomegranate produces fruit on last year's wood and 2-year-old wood. Old branches with very thick, dark bark don't produce. They need to be renewed gradually, year by year. One thing that surprises people when they start pruning the pomegranate. The first year, after aggressive pruning, production may drop. That's normal. The tree is rebuilding its structure. The second year, the difference is so striking, it's hard to believe. Tree number 7. The fig tree. The fig tree is the quintessential Mediterranean fruit tree, cultivated longer than any of the others we've seen today. And it has a biological peculiarity that makes it different from all the rest. It produces 2 harvests a year. The first harvest, called breba figs, is produced in spring and early summer on last year's wood. These are the large fruits that ripen between May and June. The second harvest, the main crop figs, is produced in summer and fall on the current year's shoots. This dual nature has a direct consequence on how you prune in March. If you prune too aggressively, you eliminate last year's wood and lose the breba crop. If you don't prune at all, the tree fills with old branches that reduce overall production, and the fruits are smaller. The correct balance with the fig tree in March is maintenance pruning and thinning, not aggressive structural pruning. Remove clearly dead or damaged branches. Thin branches that cross or point inward. More control height by cutting leaders that are climbing too high. The fig tree tolerates pruning very well, but it has a weakness. When cut, it secretes abundant white latex that irritates skin and can cause burns if it contacts the eyes. Always wear gloves and protective glasses. Another important task with the fig tree in March is removing all the dried figs that remained on the tree from last autumn and never ripened. Those dried figs are reservoirs of disease and pests. If you leave them, fungi and insects overwinter inside them and attack the new growth. That fig tree in your garden producing a dozen figs a year because the branches are in total chaos can, with correct march, pruning over 2 or 3 consecutive years, transform into a tree giving you baskets and baskets of sweet fruit. I'm not exaggerating. That's what pruning does when you understand the biology. Now, you've pruned all 7 trees in March. You've opened the canopies, removed dead wood, shaped the structure. What now? Why is this going to triple your harvest and not just improve it a little? This is the part most videos and books never explain. The part that ties everything together. Imagine a fruit tree's energy as a river. That river has a fixed amount of water coming from the photosynthesis of the leaves, and that river has to split into three streams: growth, meaning new wood; maintenance, keeping the existing structure alive; and reproduction, making flowers and fruit. In nature, the tree always prioritizes growth and maintenance. Reproduction comes last, because from an evolutionary standpoint, a tree that grows large and lives a long time has more chances of reproducing in the long run than one that spends all its energy making fruit 1 year and then dies. Your goal as a gardener is exactly the opposite. You want a small, manageable tree that puts the majority of its energy into producing fruit year after year for decades. The March prune, done correctly, takes the first step. It establishes or maintains an efficient structure that prevents the tree from wasting energy on unproductive branches. Every cut you make is a decision about where energy goes, but the March prune alone doesn't triple the harvest. What triples it is combining the March prune with the summer prune. And here comes the second pillar of this system. The summer prune is done in August, the first 2 weeks when the new growth has consolidated and the growing season is winding down. At that point, you shorten all new shoots from the current year. Main shoots get shortened to about 6 inches. Secondary branches coming off those main shoots get shortened to about 3 inches, and any tertiary shoots get shortened to about 1 inch. Why does this work? Because when you shorten shoots in August, the tree can no longer respond by producing more growth, because the growing season is nearly over. So it does the only thing it can do. It transforms those shortened buds into fruiting spurs, those short, stubby little protuberances that in spring will produce the flowers, and from the flowers, the fruit. March pruning shapes the tree and eliminates what doesn't serve. August pruning forces the tree to convert its energy into fruit. Together, and in an annual cycle, they're what turns a mediocre tree into a food production machine. And there are concrete numbers behind this. An apple tree that unpruned or badly pruned produces 15 to 20 pounds a year can reach 55 to 65 pounds with the late spring plus summer pruning system after 4 or 5 years of consistent work. A pear can go from 10 pounds to 45, a peach from 8 pounds to 30. A plum that barely produced can fill entire buckets. That's what tripling the harvest means. It's not an empty promise. It's what happens when you stop letting the tree make its own decisions. Let me give you the practical system so you leave this video with a clear action plan. In March, when the buds on your trees begin to swell, but before the shoots have opened, gather your tools: sharp pruning shears disinfected with alcohol or diluted bleach, a hand saw for thick branches, wound sealant for stone fruits and the fig tree. Gloves. Start with the apple tree. Remove all dead wood. Eliminate inward-pointing branches. Shorten leaders to outward-facing buds to create or maintain the pyramid shape. Each cut ½ an inch above the bud at a slight downward angle. Move to the pear. Same logic as the apple, but with special care not to overdo it if the tree is mature. Maintenance pruning, not radical transformation. Then the peach. Work with renewal pruning. Identify last year's wood, bright color, well-formed buds, and keep it. Remove old wood without replacement and thin the center. Seal all cuts. The plum. Suckers first, flush to the ground, no exceptions. Then crossing and inward branches. Immediate sealing of every cut. The cherry. Control height by cutting leaders with a relay branch. Thin the interior canopy. Immediate sealing. The pomegranate. Remove all basal shoots and suckers. Open the tree outward. Gradually renew old wood, leaving young branches in their place. The fig tree, thinning and maintenance prune. Remove last year's dried figs. Control height. This entire process across all 7 trees takes approximately 2 hours if your tools are ready and the trees aren't severely neglected. Then, in August, you come back with the shears. First 2 weeks of August. New shoots to 6 inches. Secondary branches to 3 inches. Tertiary shoots to 1 inch. That's the second act, the one that forces fruiting. There's one more thing I want to tell you before we finish, and I think it's the most important of all. You're not pruning just to harvest more next summer. You're building something. A correctly formed and maintained fruit tree doesn't need you to rescue it every year. It stays healthy on its own. It carries its fruit without breaking. It produces consistently for decades. A badly pruned tree, or one that's never been pruned, punishes itself and punishes you. It becomes too large, unmanageable, prone to splitting in wind, or under the weight of a good harvest. And when it loses a major structural branch, you don't just lose that year's fruit. You lose the fruiting spurs that would have produced fruit for the next 10 or 15 years. What you do in March and what you do in August, every year for the life of the tree, is what determines whether that tree feeds you and your children for 30 years or ends up as firewood after 5. All 7 fruit trees we covered today, apple, pear, peach, plum, and cherry, pomegranate, and fig, are capable of this transformation. All of them can go from being decorative, unproductive trees to serious food production systems in the home garden. The only thing required is understanding the biology and acting at the right moment. March is that moment. The buds swelling on your trees right now are the signal. When you walk out there tomorrow morning and see them starting to open, you'll know exactly what to do. Shape in March, force fruit in August. If this video changed how you see your orchard, hit that like button and subscribe. We uncover the forgotten knowledge that turns ordinary gardens into extraordinary ones. Share this with someone who has fruit trees sitting idle. The next piece of the puzzle is coming soon.